Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Two Credits Podcast. I am Ari,
And I'm Taylor.
and today we're going to be talking about a few things from this week. First up, we wanted to talk about the easy anti-cheat controversy that's going on right now, which is basically that the Wine guys and the Proton guys have sort of figured out how to get it to work on Linux, but Tim Sweeney doesn't seem too happy about it. He doesn't seem to think that it's going to provide the level of protection that they need it to have, and it looks like it might be shut down sometime in the near future.
Right. Yeah, and the thing that comes to mind to me first about it is I really wonder how they're going to address shutting it down, I guess. Like, does that take the form of banning people that are playing on Linux with that? Or, like how do you even message that? And
Like,
also, oh, sorry.
yeah, it's gonna be an interesting thing because they could literally probably do a check for that because it's never going to be the same as actually being on a Windows system. Because the whole reason that they want to shut it down is it can't get Ring Zero access because it's not on the actual Linux system. It's some software layer running over the Linux system, so they're never going to have the exact mimicry. Like, it's never going to be just like Windows. So they are going to have different like signals that they can check, and they could easily shut it down like that. They could just turn it off one day. But I'm sure with Tim Sweeney's obvious hatred of Linux, having once compared it to leaving the US to go to Canada, which I'm not even sure what he's quite implying there, but you can tell it's a negative thing. Um, he could just do that one day. He could just go up and go, like, yeah, we're not going to support it anymore here, it's shut off. But will they do it is a good question.
Yeah. It's kind of a difficult problem because other than just making it work on Linux natively. Like this half solution, I think it makes sense to not want this to be the way that it goes because from the developer's perspective, they want to make sure that people aren't just cheating like crazy in their games. And we're talking about games like, Apex Legends. I'm pretty sure Fortnite uses EAC as well, right?
Yeah, that's why they
So
bought it, I
like
think.
yeah, like a lot of big games like that are paladins. So they just don't want to have a million cheaters in their stuff because their anti-cheat is going to be ineffective on Linux, which means that anyone looking to cheat would just hop over there because it'd be so easy to circumvent. So I think it makes sense that they don't want it to go down this path. But it's just disappointing on the other hand too because, all of these games were suddenly playable for a short time, and that's probably going to be clamped down on pretty quickly. But also, I don't see them branching out to Linux with it, which sucks because that just means like all this stuff that is actually capable of running just won't, even though it works perfectly pretty much in Wine or in Proton, but it's just, it's not going to work out, which just sucks.
I mean, the other layer to that is that they did have a Linux version, either in development or it may have been in production at some point. I can't remember exactly. But they actively chose to shut it down shortly after um, Epic bought it because they had been in talks with Steam to get it working properly, and then they just completely killed the project, and that was when Sweeney made the statement that I mentioned earlier. And just it feels like the obvious solution was to not shut it down and to just keep building the Linux version of anti-cheat, but instead to go out of your way to kill the project and then decide, okay, well, I'm going to support you if you meet these impossible standards, and to like say that and everyone know that you're never going to meet those impossible standards, but to like put it out there, it just seems a little bit over the top with how harsh he's being about it.
Yeah, I actually forgot about that, but yeah, I remembered after you mentioned it how they picked it up and how that was a big thing at the time too, because it was looking really promising, but then, it got totally walked back and probably for the foreseeable future. Like I don't think they have any reason to really go over there now that they've canceled it. Like if they had just left it going, then sure, but because they canceled the whole thing, like I don't see them having much motivation to start that work again. So it's just an unfortunate situation.
And I mean, to be fair, I can understand why a lot of developers don't want to put the time into Linux because it's one of those platforms where everybody knows a little bit more about computers just by pure virtue of having to run the system optimally. So they are they account for a lot of like bug reports, like a lot, because people know what they're talking about on some level, and they also are such a small portion of the market because Linux may run like the server world, but not a whole lot of people use it on desktop. So I can understand that like the revenue to cost ratio is way off for most companies, but at the same time, to just keep saying, okay, but if you meet this, we can have it, and to if you meet this, you can have it, but you can't meet that because you're running an emulation layer, and it just feels so like I can't quite explain it. It's just it feels like he wants them to suffer. You know what I mean? He wants them to feel like they're always one step short of reaching it, but to have them keep trying with the promise because he just seems like he does not like Linux at all.
Yeah, no, I agree with that.
And I mean, I wouldn't be shocked if Fortnite was running on Azure or something just to keep off of Linux.
I mean, even that has Linux now, from what I remember. But yeah.
Anyways, so from there, we also wanted to talk about the Satisfactory sales numbers because there's been a lot of controversy surrounding the Epic Game Store since it became a thing, and people are not convinced that there's ever going to be an audience, which is hilarious to me because just in April, Fortnite set a record for its concurrent user count, which was like 12.3 million people online at once. So to think that there's a concurrent user count for one game on that platform that matches Steam's like total concurrent user count in a lot of cases, and people are still like, nope, growing platform. It just makes me laugh. But Satisfactory, they came out and said that it sold about 1,326,518 copies, and 958,917 of those have been on Epic, with the remainder of them being on Steam, which is 367,601. And Epic's reached 500,000 within 3 months, while Steam's reached 367,000 in under a month. And it's an interesting figure because it does show that the people that are waiting for these games to hit Steam are actively going out and buying them like as soon as they possibly can. But I don't know that it shows that like Steam is still a better place to sell your games.
Yeah, because I mean, there have been a lot of Epic exclusives, not so many announced in recent memory, but there was quite a lot for a while. And one of the big things that a lot of people who were not happy about that were saying was, well, your sales are going to be ruined now because you're taking this deal that keeps your game off of presumably the largest storefront on PC. So the argument was, well, the sales are going to suffer quite a lot because of that. But I think what this shows in particular, and what other games that have been successful with it have shown, is that the Epic exclusivity doesn't really seem to hurt sales at all. Because, I mean, well, first of all, they sold like a million units on Epic anyway, so they're super successful just on that store. But then also, like you said, lots of people who don't want to buy it on there, they don't just boycott it outright. Maybe some people do, but a lot of people will just be happy enough waiting until it comes to Steam anyway, even if it is later. So yeah, and yeah, and I think the sales numbers are pretty equivalent. Like on Steam, it sold faster, but also it did have a discount when it launched on Steam, and like within the first month of launching on Steam. Whereas on Epic, obviously, it didn't have a discount in launch. So even though it was a bit faster on Steam, you know, like you say, a lot of that's just people that were waiting on it, and also that it was on discount at the very start. So
I'd also be curious to know, since they only said that it hit 500,000 just under 3 months after launch, and they didn't really tell us about the tail end of it. I'd be interested to know how many of those sales came during Epic sales, because Satisfactory is like a $30 game, and then when you put it on sale, it's down to closer to 20, and then you have the $10 coupon that works on top of that. So I'd be really interested to know if it was like the other half of it basically was all through sales or if it was spread out over that entire time.
Yeah, for sure. Those epic coupons create such insane deals on games that you would never really see at that point in a game's lifetime normally, but you get like this crazy deal on stuff that's still very new. So yeah, I think that's definitely true. Like that makes sense. But I'm also interested, just kind of on a side note, I'm also interested to know like it's not something that we'll ever know, but I wonder how long will Epic keep doing those sales where they are basically subsidizing those coupons because they are still paying the developer the full amount. Um, like they're covering the cost of that coupon basically. So it is interesting to wonder, or maybe they figured it out and it's totally sustainable even with their lower cut, and that's fine. But it's just interesting, and unfortunately, I don't think we'll ever really know how many of that was the case, but it would be really interesting to see that. Yeah.
Well, in regards to that, the thing that I'm noticing is that they have exactly one game. They have exactly one engine, and both of those are making them a lot of money simultaneously. So in a situation like this where you have two products in two different like sectors of in one industry and they complement each other in a certain way, you probably have the money indefinitely until the one product starts doing worse, possibly, to keep doing this. I mean, they could probably do it forever. It's a matter of whether they want to or not that would probably be more relevant.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think because of how much growth that we've seen the Epic Store have so rapidly, I think they will probably reach a point very quickly if they haven't already where they're quite happy with just the growth naturally and they don't feel like they need to keep pumping money into growing the user base. So because there's also those free games as well that they give out to get more people invested, which is really nice. But presumably that'll stop eventually. Like it was already going to stop, but then they extended it. So, but in any case, I think the going back to the original point though, I think this really does show that Epic is a totally viable platform to have your game on, even as an exclusive. So like and also that it doesn't seem to matter much that it's coming out way later on Steam because people will still buy it. So I think those are a couple of very interesting things to see that go against what a lot of people would say about it when they're upset about whatever game not ending up on Steam.
But it's also good for developers on top of that because these developers that actually took the deals, unlike the Dark guy who became known for publicly rejecting the deal for reasons I'll never understand, um, they get the money from the sales being subsidized. So, like, the way that I've heard the Epic deal being explained is basically if you don't get sales up to a certain point, you still get paid for if you had made sales up to a certain point. And so they get that, plus they get the money from the real sales. And this is actually very good for developers. And I'm very confused as to why people are still fighting it, seeing that.
Well, and the other thing as well, which Epic really pioneered, was the much lower cut that they were taking, which other platforms also took a crack at that later down the line. But for the longest time, like for many years, the standard cut was the 30%, 70%, and now it's been there are a lot of stores, including Steam, even although only for the big games, where the cut can be something else now that's much lower. So you're getting much more money per sale as well, like a significant amount more.
Yeah, and that's definitely significant because when you take out that 30% and then you take out whatever the publisher takes out, the developer is getting jack shit at the end.
Yeah, on a lot of stuff.
All right, so with that talked about, we should move over to the Xbox Smart Delivery controversy, which is basically Microsoft has started putting measures in place to convince developers and publishers that they should use the Smart Delivery upgrade scheme, which offers free next gen upgrades. And it will just basically allow you to download whatever version with your save data, achievements, and whatever on whatever platform you play it on, rather than having to buy the new version or upgrade to it. And what they've done specifically is that they've said that if you don't use this scheme, you'll be locked out of certain cross save features that have not been like clarified quite yet.
Yeah, and as well on top of that, that just because of the way that you know it would all shake out, you can't change your mind. So after your game comes out, if you've chosen not to use that smart delivery feature, then you can't go back and opt back into it later. So you've really got to carefully consider whether or not you want to go down that scheme. Um, they're also okay with developers doing their own, which is what EA is kind of doing, and also kind of 2K. You know, they're doing kind of their own thing. The kind of weird thing about it is, first of all, that Microsoft is the only one that's got this kind of smart delivery thing. Like Sony is pretty much leaving it up to publishers to handle it however they want, whereas Microsoft is at least, they're still letting you make a choice, so you can still do whatever you want with your own games, but they're offering you the ability to use this system so you don't have to do that. But the one thing that's kind of interesting is that it seems like, although I'm sure they would be happiest if everyone used this and gave the free upgrade, they are actually okay with you selling a bundled version of a game, like what 2K is doing with NBA 2K21, where it kind of includes the next gen and the current gen version, but at a higher price. So I think it seems like the thing that they're most concerned about is just making sure that as many games as possible have a easy upgrade path. Whether that's, you have to pay a little bit more, or whether that's just you just pop the disc in and it just works for free.
Yeah, and I actually thought this was an interesting move because there are two sides of it. On one side, Microsoft has been really pushing for like a one Xbox platform across all Xbox consoles and PC. And so from that standpoint, it makes sense that they do this because they really want everybody to be getting in on their one platform thing. They want gamers to feel like everything that they buy on this platform just works across everything because it's one platform. But on the other side, it's it's a little bit weird to take the values of your company and impose them on the other company when it comes to business decisions like this, because they're asking every company to give a free upgrade across generations, which has not been a thing in the past. And what I'm wondering if we'll see is a lot of companies not doing this because it's not something that's offered from PS4 to PS5. And so because they can't have parity, simply because they can't have parity, they won't do it.
Yeah, and I mean that seems like that would be the reason as well for a company that did want to do something like that, for them to just use their own mechanism for it, like EA is doing, as opposed to using Microsoft's thing and then also having to use your own thing just for PS5. Um, so yeah, it is a bit weird because it's not an equivalent thing over on Sony's end. So yeah, it is just weird. It's the whole thing is just really weird. And yeah, it hasn't been a thing before. So it's just kind of crazy because, last generation jumping over, the approach that everyone took was like a remaster of their other thing or whatever, and nobody really gave free upgrades. To some extent, you did have some developers offering discounted upgrades, but we haven't really had a thing before where everyone kind of is starting to expect that their stuff will just work moving over.
I mean, it's still not even really a thing now. Microsoft's trying to make it a thing, which is also what makes this such an odd thing. And I am genuinely concerned that we're not going to see a lot of publishers pull, like, actually get in on it. And, like, they have 14 announced right now, but I feel like that 14 that have been announced is going to be the majority of what we see. I feel like the numbers are going to drop heavily, like, right after the gen drops, because I feel like most people are just going to forget that it was ever supposed to be a thing, because it was never a thing before.
Right. And the other thing that is interesting to think about as well is it does work both ways. So I believe I believe it's supposed to work both ways. So you should be able to get it something on Series X and then be able to go back to your Xbox One or whatever and still play it there if you had that in a different room or whatever. So that's going to be a problem as well because, it's not like they're going to keep offering that going forward because although Microsoft wants to have it so that their first party stuff for a while after Series X comes out will still work on the older Xboxes, other companies aren't going to want to do that because that's going to be a pain to have to support this wide range of models of the console with, all kinds of power levels all over the place. So, yeah, definitely I think it will decrease over time. I'm kind of surprised by some of the big names that have already jumped in, like with Assassin's Creed Valhalla, how they said that they're going to do it through this. Like, that's really neat. But I am wondering if they're going to try and get a few more big names in there as well to try and, get the ball rolling. Because we could be wrong. Like, there could be, if their plan works out, then hopefully, like, almost everything would just carry over. But I'm not sure how realistic that is, really.
And then the other question is, like, how long would this go on for, even if it was successful? Because there's a certain point where the opportunity cost is much higher than what you're going to get back for it, because the generation has been around for how many years, and there not isn't really a reason to develop for the older consoles anymore.
Yeah, unless your name is Microsoft.
True that. All right, so that's the news for this week, and we should move on to what we've been playing this week, which we're going to start with the No Straight Roads demo, which came out, I think, last week, and it is exactly one boss fight, and I'll let you take this.
Okay. Yeah, so it is the Mother and Child demo. Came out on Epic Store, um, because I believe that game is an Epic exclusive on PC. And so it's a demo from a Tokyo Game Show from, I think, a couple of years ago now. So a pretty old demo. And the one thing with that is that it means that they weren't really designing the demo for people who weren't going to be right next to them, if that makes sense. So they kind of just throw you in there, and that is both cool to be able to just sort of discover stuff, but it also ends up being a bit clunky too because they don't really explain how to play. And the the other thing with that is we don't even really know what the game is going to be. So it's hard to try and figure out what exactly you're supposed to do, and we don't even know what the game is. Like, it seems like it might be some kind of boss rush thing, but it's not really clear. So, I mean, like, we both played it. I really liked it still, but it definitely left me feeling a lot more mixed than when I went in, when I was pretty much just excited about it. Whereas I think the demo kind of exposed some flaws that might be in the full game. You definitely saw some of that stuff. Like, just because it doesn't explain anything, it's hard to know if they're actually flaws or if it's just because it's an older build or things aren't explained or whatever. But it's a bit tricky.
Yeah, and it's also weird that they just put out a several-year-old demo during the release year instead of trying to make something a little bit more, like, up to date and actually more of a demo that shows you the game. Because I remember when you told me that it had abilities, and I had played through it twice, and I didn't even know there were abilities because I had never paused, and the only way that you, like, actually see that menu is if you pause. but it's such a short demo that basically the only time that I wasn't playing the game was when I died. That was the only time. And so I never saw that. But also, I can't get over the fact that there's only one real attack button. That's something that kills me. It feels bad to only be able to attack in exactly one way 90% of the time. And it the way that attacks work also feels like it's almost like you're playing like a dodge 'em up and then like some sort of like very basic puzzle, and then the attack is just there to like fill in the feeling of it being a fight. But the way that especially the boss fight in the demo played is that you weren't really actively attacking a lot of the times. A lot of the times you were instead trying to set up different, what were they called, props, to attack for you, or to destroy the notes that were coming in, turn them into something that you could throw at the enemy. But that attack was also very passive. You literally just hit the button and it attacks it automatically. It was so weird.
Yeah, it kind of feels like it gives me the same feeling that I have when I encounter a boss in a lot of like platforming games where you're not really attacking the boss actively a lot of the time, and it's more about the spectacle of like it feels like they want all the bosses to be this big spectacle where for the most part you're just focused on everything that the boss is doing, and you're not really, or they're not really designing the game in a way where it feels like you're going to be actively fighting it a lot of the time. It seems like it's more about, just being as part of this big spectacle that's going on and just avoiding attacks that are timed with the music. And then, you kind of hit the button to fling notes at it or whatever. But like you said, it's pretty much automatic. Like it aims automatically and so it is very weird. And it leaves me with a lot of questions too, because the abilities, I mean, it doesn't tell you about the abilities, and then you go in the pause menu and you see that you have those abilities there, and it gives you a little description, but each character only has two, at least for the demo. One of them for each character is a heal, which I didn't have any use for when I played at least. And then the other ability for the drummer is like it extends your melee range and I think increases the damage or something, but like because of the way the fights are designed, where a lot of the time you're not able to actively attack the boss, like you just can't damage it, it just seemed like that's not really something useful. And then I don't even. Oh, yeah, and the other one was to instantly transform every prop on stage, but it's just kind of like meh. And it doesn't really give the best impression of how the combat is going to feel in the game. So I think if that is kind of going to be the way that it works, it's really going to be reliant on them making the boss side of it really interesting, like making the bosses all do different things and introduce new mechanics, hopefully, that maybe aren't part of your kit in your like as part of your character, but are part of the boss and the boss arena and things like that.
And also, on the note of the spectacle thing, to be fair, the music is very good. The animations
Yeah.
are very good. Like, the art style is reminiscent of Psychonauts, but much more, like, refined because it's supposed to be. And the characters seem like they could be interesting, though I'm not 100% sure if you're supposed to like the people you play as, because they just kind of seem a little bit like obnoxious assholes that just want to destroy everything they don't like. So
Yeah.
I'm not totally sure you're supposed to like them, but I do understand the culture that comes from. And I mean, it does look very nice. It just doesn't feel nice, and that's exacerbated when you play in co-op because the camera is so bad. It is so incredibly bad. It follows the main character, and that includes when you jump and everything. So when your second player is just falling off screen all of the time, sometimes off the bottom of the screen, which is something that I don't even know why or how that would happen in such small arenas. But it happened, and it felt really bad.
Yeah. I know it's kind of weird too because at least from the demo, which is a very limited section of the game and it's old, but the two characters did not seem all that different to me either. So I wonder, like, because it would make more sense as a co-op game if if you can both kind of set it up so you have different abilities that complement each other or cover different areas of weakness, or like, maybe one of you has the heal and then the other one has, whatever else. But it's just, it definitely seems like the co-op could be something that's not great. I just off of what I saw, I can't imagine wanting to play through that whole game in co-op because the arenas are very small at any given time. And also just what you say about the camera, like that reminds me of playing like the Lego games where the other person is kind of just along for the ride. At least in the older games where the camera was shared and you can kind of just drag them around because it doesn't split screen. So yeah, that seems like a really awkward part of it for sure.
And the other thing, though, is that we also don't know how far into the game this is in any way, shape, or form. So we don't know if this is about as hard as it gets, if it's like just the beginning, like scraping the surface. Like, are those abilities unlocked because we're somewhere in the middle of the game? Are there no abilities at the beginning? Like, there's just so much that that demo did not answer, and I just wish they had done something different.
Yeah, so I saw in an article that it was apparently they thought it was the first boss. I didn't go and check into that more, um, which is why, like, this whole demo, it really feels like something that was for a show where you've got the developers there to explain to you, oh, this is where in the game this is. Here's the stuff that you need to be doing. Like, here's how everything works. We just don't really get any of that context, which is really unfortunate because I feel like even just doing something like putting some messages on the floor, like Dark Souls 1 style, where they just, or like put up some signs or anything, that just some basics, like, hey, by the way, you've got abilities, here's what they are, here's how they work. Um, this is like, this is where in the game this is. So let's say it is the first boss. Well, that would explain why it's so, at least for me, I found it very easy. So and very basic as well. Even if it wasn't easy, it is very basic. So it would just be nice to have more of that context.
Yeah. Hopefully the final game is better, but I don't know. There's just something that doesn't feel very good about it. It feels so simple for one. Like
Yeah,
I think that's the way that it should be referred to as. It's just it feels simple. It feels like there's some critical element that's missing that
yeah,
maybe the final game gives you, but I'm just not sure.
yeah. And it's unfortunate because, like I said, I was very excited going into it, just off of the fact that it has such a striking aesthetic. It has a really nice music, which they've been showcasing all the different trailers and which you can hear in the demo as well. But the gameplay definitely seems lacking as it is right now, and it made me feel a lot more mixed than I was before, which makes me worry too because if the final game does have a lot more, I don't really think the demo does a good job of showcasing that, and I think it could turn people off who might have been interested before, but they kind of just might have been a bit lost because you can just miss so much of the little that is there because it doesn't explain anything and it doesn't really guide you at all. And also, it's really hard to figure out how to do stuff when you're in the middle of a boss fight.
Yes.
So it's a bunch of things that go into it that I think make it really awkward. I wonder if the reason why they decided to go down this path is because they didn't think that they could dedicate the resources to a different demo to making a new one because the game has already been delayed, I think at least 2 times. And plus with everything going on, with COVID and whatever. So I do wonder, like maybe they just wanted to put something out and they were like, well, we already have this build of a demo from before and we can just put that out. But It's just, I think it might backfire a little bit for
Yeah,
sure.
it definitely might. And one has to wonder why they felt the pressure to put one out when so few other games that have been at least talked about on the level that No Straight Roads has, in part probably because of the mystery surrounding it, like they haven't. Like even in the Steam Game Festival, I think they said, well, I don't know if this is accurate, but I saw it said that over 900 games were taking part, which meant potentially 900 games had demos, but none of them were really all that high tier. Like there were a few that were up there, but like not like way up there, like where No Straight Roads is, where it got an exclusivity deal.
Right. And it's because, like, I haven't looked at what the data says regarding this, but there is the impression that demos, for the most part, don't seem to help get more sales, but they can lose you sales if you put something out and it turns people off. Because, most people, if they're going to download your demo, well, then they were probably interested in buying to begin with, for the most part. And if they weren't, then, maybe you would convert them. But I think it's much more dangerous that if you put something out that doesn't do a good job, or like doesn't paint your game in a good light, then it can definitely turn people off, and then you're just losing yourself money. So it is a bit questionable to put something out like this where it feels like, I don't want to say lazy, but it just feels like they didn't really put a ton of effort into it, and I think that could be a mistake for sure. So,
Yeah. So moving on, we also played the Ghostrunner demo, which was part of the Steam Game Festival that I just mentioned, was one of the higher tier demos. Ironically, they didn't intend to have the demo out. It was originally out earlier in the year, but people complained, so they put it out again. And I actually really like this one. I am a little concerned that there's not going to be that much to gameplay beyond what we saw in the demo, but everything about it feels really good. Like the graphics are good, the music is good. It feels fast-paced as hell. Like there are slight Dishonored vibes, but it's not an open-ended thing. It's very, very linear. But the main gameplay revolves around trying to parkour around various linear like cyberpunk environments that are all very high up in the air, and if you fall you die kind of thing, while trying to kill enemies that are just stationed at various places throughout them. And the main mechanic for killing enemies is using a blade, and of course they have guns like most of these games have, so you have to find a way to not get hit, which in this case is whenever you jump into the air in a specific way, you go into bullet time and you can dodge around the bullets. And while that seems like it might be easy, you have to time it perfectly because even in the demo, the cadence of the bullets is exactly timed so that if you don't time your dodges where they're almost right on top of you, you're going to hit the ground and that enemy is going to shoot you again. And it felt infuriating the first few times, but once you get it, it feels so good to dodge every single bullet. Like it's such a good feeling.
yeah, it definitely gives a big sense of satisfaction. It feels very rewarding to kind of get it right. It almost kind of feels like it is a puzzle in some ways where there's different ways that you can solve it by dealing with all the enemies in an area before moving on, which seems like the thing most of the time. Like it doesn't seem like you can skip enemies all that much, if at all. But you can kind of try it a few times and it resets you very quickly if you do die. So it's very easy to try something out and see if it seems promising. And if it does, then you can keep, trying to figure out exactly how to execute it. Or just totally change your strategy and figure something else out. And I was really impressed because this isn't something that would have normally been a game that I would be hugely interested in, but I gave it a go and it just feels amazing. Like the movement in particular is some of the best feeling movement I have ever seen in a game, I think. And it's just like incredibly fluid, it's really responsive. There's even though the environments are quite striking as well, I felt there's like a really good amount of visual clarity. So you know, you kind of have all the information and you have this really responsive movement and it tells you exactly how everything works. And then it's just up to you. Like you just get left to just do it. And it just feels amazing. Like I don't really have anything anything at all bad to say about it. It just feels so good. And it definitely put the game on my list of things that I want to play when it comes out when it wasn't at all before.
Yeah, I had been interested solely because of the cyberpunk aesthetic, and I'd seen some of the trailers in the past, and I was a little bit worried about it because I had been looking at them, and I'm like, this kind of looks like it's gonna be one of those, what's it called, the cloud whatever game, where it's like a speedrunning kind of thing, because like the weird platforming levels that just have like no reason to them except for gameplay reasons, and I was really concerned it was going to be like that. And then it turns out that this is what we got, which is a really tightly designed, really fast-paced, like just dash through a bunch of enemies to a target. And I think that's the best way you can describe it because it's it's one of those games that if you slow down, you're dead because and this was very well established by this one section in the demo very early on. You slide down a ramp, you jump over, there's an enemy right there, and then there are enemies in like a T shape, and there are
Yeah.
some walls. And if you slow down at any point in that, like you kill the one guy and you're like, okay, I'm safe, right? No, there's another guy just off to the right of you, and then you kill that guy and you're like, okay, now I'm safe, right? No, there's another guy to the right of you that you couldn't see from the initial guy. And it's just it's it's a hard thing to get right to go like that and not feel exhausting, but somehow they managed it. And I can't explain how they did yet. I'd have to play more of it, but it just I don't know. It just makes me want to play more.
I think something that helps, which is interesting, because it can definitely backfire, but I think something that helps is that, at least in the demo, it seems like you kind of arrive in an area and then you've got the enemies to deal with and whatever, and you can't move on until you've dealt with them, which can definitely feel bad in some games. But I think what it does in this game is it lets them break it up into more bite sized pieces, I guess. So it's kind of like you have this puzzle to get through of dealing with all these enemies in this new arena. And then you finally, you know, however long that takes you, might be a few tries, especially in some of them, as you say, where you have multiple enemies that can shoot you at once. So if you until you learn the area, it can be hard to get through. But then after you do pull it off, you have a little bit where you're kind of traversing around and you're getting to the next little area where you've got to deal with more enemies. And I think just that little break in between helps it quite a lot because it just gives you, it's not even that long. It's probably like 15 to 30 seconds before you
Yeah.
get to the next one, but it's enough time to kind of reset a little bit and then you move on to the next crazy thing. And you have then that intensity for a bit as you deal with the next thing, and then it goes back down and kind of resets again and just continues like that.
I also feel like they paced it really well for at least the portion that the demo's in, because there were a few sections where you'd get that little break, but then there'd only be like one or two enemies, so you'd be on your toes still, but you wouldn't be in the middle of this giant firefight like the one towards the end with all the hooks and no cover. That one was killer, but that was fun. That was a fun
Yeah.
thing to figure out. But like going back to what I said at the beginning, I am worried that there aren't going to be enough mechanics that weren't showcased in the demo beyond what like it's hard to imagine where they go from there. Like you have these tightly designed mechanics, but then to have a long enough game, you have to keep upgrading in some way, and it's just hard to imagine how they're going to do that.
Yeah, definitely. Because, from what I played, I was really happy with what there was, but it's such a short demo. Like, you can get through it in like 10 to 15 minutes. So, for that length, yeah, of course, even something simple is fine, but it is going to be interesting to see like what do they do to keep it fresh for however long the game is going to be. Because if it was just like that for even like a few hours, I think that could very easily get like lose steam in the middle. So, and I hope they don't go too crazy with like for instance, if they gave you some kind of ranged weapon, I don't know. Like, I think they would have to be careful with how they do that because then that would totally, that's the potential to totally mess everything up, I think. So it's definitely like a cautious optimism, I would say. Like,
Yeah.
if they are able to expand on what they've shown in ways that keep up the intensity and keep it exciting and keep you from just mastering a couple of mechanics and then just the rest of the game being trivial or whatever or samey, then it'll be like insanely good. But it could definitely be something that, if they didn't have enough ideas, that could just fizzle out.
Yeah, and I've seen some of the environments through the trailers, and I'm wondering if most of what they're going to do is going to be changing up the environment to keep it interesting. But the shortcuts in the trailer, it's hard to tell if they're going to actually make the environment mean something or if it just looks different at this point.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
So, yeah, I mean, the demo is very worth playing, but I'm definitely going to have to wait and see what happens with the final game.
Yeah, it's kind of a shame that the. I'm pretty sure the demo got taken back down, which is
Yeah, it
kind of a
did.
shame because it's super solid. Like, it's one of the better demos that I've ever played because it really does a good job of showing you very quickly what the game is and what makes it so cool. Like they throw you right in there. There's pretty much but they do it in a way like unlike the No Straight Roads one that we were talking about. They tell you a bit and that's enough. Like they just tell you a little bit. They're just like, this is how this works. This is how the dodging thing works. Okay, there you go. Figure it out. And then that's it. And that's enough. And that's perfect because it doesn't take long at all to get into the action, but you know what you have to do and what you have at your disposal. So,
Yeah, it's the perfect balance between telling you nothing and telling you, oops, there's a dude over there who could shoot you.
yeah.
Yeah, so moving on, we the last game we're going to talk about today is Hyperscape, which got a bit of hype when Ubisoft decided to go, look, you can get into this week-long technical test if you watch some streams, and I have not seen anyone talk about it since then. Since the technical test closed, there's been no chatter, and I personally feel that the problem with that is that the world is so boring. It's so gray. It's so unfinished looking. And I get that there's like this digital kind of world going on, but when you look at the lobby, and it's interesting that they went the route they did where you actually have to walk around the lobby to the invite friends menu. I don't know how I feel about that, but when you look at the aesthetic there, it looks pretty nice. It's a very like structured digital world with a very like uniquely digital aesthetic. It has nice colors and everything. And then you get into the actual game and it's gray and tan everywhere with these ugly yellow barriers. And it's just so bad. And I hope that it's a bait and switch. I really hope that that map is intentionally like that to keep people from having any idea of what they're getting into because it's just so incredibly ugly.
Yeah, I think one thing that probably played into it a bit is the fact that it got leaked and then they decided seemingly to throw up that website with of that fictional company that is in the game. And I guess that might have been why they opened it up for everyone to just jump into as well because it got leaked. And so they were just like, well, to do a battle royale and to have the launch be successful or whatever, you really have to not have a long period between when people find out about it and when people can just play it. So I wonder if they were really ready or if they were just like trying to salvage that situation. But definitely there's a lot of like the game simultaneously in a lot of ways feels very finished, I guess, even if I don't like everything I see. But like, the movement all feels fluid. The gunplay feels like you'd expect from it being done and all that sort of thing. But then there's other stuff where you're like, this really doesn't seem ready.
Especially the loot distribution. I really hate the loot distribution. It's so terrible. And I get that part of that is because in other games you have all these different types of ammo you have to find. So you're always finding the ammo next to the guns because it's a specific type of ammo. They don't want you to just run out of ammo. So here's some ammo right next to the gun. But in Hyperscape, you have one box of ammo that gets you ammo for all the guns you have in your inventory at that time, which is one or two. And because of that, I feel like they just decided, you know what, we can just put a few little boxes where we spawn in items, and if they find the ammo boxes, they find them, and if they don't, they don't. But it may be a digital world, but it just feels so mechanical. Like to have these boxes that are just sitting in these perfectly aligned areas, and that they're just so few and far between, and it's so perfectly placed for what they want it to be. It doesn't feel good. And the barriers also make it feel even worse because it's not a door that you're going through. It's the thing you have to break and then it's just gone. And it's such a
Yeah.
weird mechanic. There's no hiding behind them. There's nothing about that lets you do anything. You break it and it's gone.
Yeah, I don't really understand the whole like why they decided to go for that barriers thing because I just don't really know what they were trying to achieve. Because it's annoying to have to just break everything to go through it, and then it's weird that they're all gone forever after that. And it doesn't play well with the whole system of when you die and you can, because in this game they decided to make it so that when you die, if your squad is still alive but you go down, you don't just kind of go down like in Apex or Fortnite or whatever where you're kind of crawling around or whatever, or you don't just die and then just have to sit there and spectate. You become this like ghost thing that only your team can see, and you have total freedom to run around and use the traversal abilities that you have and everything, so you can scout stuff out and whatever. But the one thing that you can't do when you're dead is break those barriers, as far as I can tell. So you can end up in really awkward, like, because there's so many of them in buildings and stuff, you just can't go through a lot of places, which is just, it's just awkward and it doesn't really make a lot of sense.
Especially
And
since
then,
you're already dead, though, because the barriers don't do anything to you except for keep you from going out a specific direction.
yeah, like I wonder if a better way of doing it would just be to let you pass through them or something. Because yeah, like it just like. But on the other hand, also I just don't understand why they decided to go with that barriers thing. Like it doesn't really look great to me. Like I don't like how it looks, and it just seems very strange. And I don't really get much out of that as opposed to just opening a door or whatever that you can then close. Because the other thing that it does too is like you can't really, like, for one you can't hide, but the other thing is you can see where people have already been for sure. Like whereas, in another game like in let's say Apex Legends, you could close a door and disguise the fact that you were in there, and they, outsiders wouldn't be able to know for sure without going in that somebody had been in there or was in there. Whereas with this, it's like, well, for sure, like somebody has gone through that way. So it's just weird. It's weird all around, that whole barriers thing.
But also, it's simultaneously too obvious and not obvious enough in the sense that if you're right there, you know that that's where the loot is. But if you're not right there, you cannot see them at all, really. Like when you're dropping, there is no indication that that building is the building with loot in it because you can barely see those yellow barriers. And that would be the
Yeah.
only value that that extremely bright thing would have, is to show you there's loot here, whereas the 12 buildings around it are just inaccessible completely.
Yeah, that's the thing that I always hate in battle royales. Are those big where they make these big buildings, or they make like a million buildings, but then they make it so that you can only actually go into a few of them or whatever. Because I know they're doing it to try and like design this big urban area, but they don't want to fill all that stuff with loot, and they don't want it to be like this
Maze.
crazy Swiss cheese maze thing. But on the other hand, it's like if you don't know the map, then like when we were playing or whatever, it's just like you think that you're dropping near a building that you could just go run into or whatever and get stuff, but then you're like, oh, actually, all of this I can't go into, so now I have to go find something I can go into, and it doesn't feel good. It's annoying.
And I mean, I feel like it's worse with this game because they've specifically made the entire thing an urban area. That's one of their like
Yeah.
gimmicks is that it's an urban battle royale, but they still have the same number of like enterable buildings that other games have. Like at least in terms of distribution. So like in Apex, you at least know that most of the buildings, the grand majority of the buildings, even if you can't go into any other floor, you can walk around beneath them and there's stuff there. But
Yeah.
in Hyperscape, it's just like, oops, this entire block is just completely blocked off.
Yeah. And I mean, in terms of like the stuff that this game does differently than other stuff, like the one thing that is interesting that can create some cool situations is, first of all, that the way that upgrading works, where it's not like a lot of other games where you're kind of either finding there are tiers of weapons, but for the most part, you're not finding tiers of weapons like in Fortnite, or you're not attaching things to your weapons like in Apex or Call of Duty. Instead, you are finding, like, whenever you find a weapon that's the same one as what you have, then you can kind of pick it up and it'll like merge into the one that you have and upgrade it, which is neat. And it's the same thing with the abilities too, because in this game, there's not really characters like in Apex, but there are abilities. But the way that it works is you have to find the abilities like loot, and it's the same deal. Like you find an ability that's the same one as the one you have, and then it upgrades it, which is cool.
I mean, it's an interesting system, but I actually, of the longer we played it, the more I started to hate it because when you have a random player, there's no way to communicate with them. Look, I've got this gun, please don't grab it. And I feel like if you're going to get to max level and you don't run into people, you absolutely have to get every single one that you find. Like, they're not distributed well enough that you're going to have a reasonable chance of hitting max level with any of your stuff. And the difference for some of them is negligible. Like, some of them it's just like magazine upgrade, magazine upgrade, magazine upgrade, magazine upgrade. But other ones, it's damage, 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 damage. And when you can't get all of that, it puts you at a really significant disadvantage. So the less people that you can directly communicate with and go, look, I've got this, please don't grab it, the more chance there is that you're going to be at a disadvantage because you can't get that because the other person is taking it. And that's where this system really starts to fall short.
Yeah, and the other thing that I was just thinking about as well is that it makes it so that it is annoying to ever switch weapons. Because, in something like whatever other game where you have an inventory and you can pick stuff up, which you don't in this game, you could pick up attachments for a different gun. Let's say if you wanted to, if you were hoping to find that gun eventually and switch to it or whatever, whereas you can't in this. So if you're swapping to something else, you're pretty much starting at the beginning again, and that doesn't feel good. So you're kind of locked into whatever you started using and whatever you've been building up the whole time, and switching is just not like feels bad.
And that's
And
exceptionally bad when you have teammates that have stolen every other one, so you're at level 2 and you're like, I need to switch, but I also can't switch.
yeah, or like you just end up in a situation where you're like, well, it would be really nice to switch to a sniper right now, but it would also feel very bad because, even though I have one here I could pick up, it's just going to be the base level one, and it's going to be very hard to find more to upgrade it, once you get later into the game. So, and one of the other big things that they talk about with the game is the whole like aspect of the viewers, which, like the idea of it being integrated with Twitch and Twitch viewers somehow being able to have an influence over the stuff that happens in a match, which, that's a cool idea on paper, but I'm pretty sure the way it works, I'm not 100% sure, but I'm pretty sure the way it works is that even if there's nobody actually watching the match that you're playing in, it kind of just chooses one. Like there's these events that can happen, which I guess is what the viewers would be voting on. It kind of just chooses one, and they have interesting effects, I guess. They have distinct effects. Like there's the lower gravity one and whatever, where
Infinite
all of a
ammo.
sudden, yeah, infinite ammo. But like, I just don't feel like it is super impactful. Like I don't think it really changes much. Like the low gravity one, I just find super annoying. The infinite ammo is like, I guess if you're fighting at that moment, then that's might be more interesting. But I don't know. Like, does it really change anything though? Because it just means that everyone has infinite ammo, so it's kind of just whatever. Like it just means that nobody's reloading for that time, so it just becomes a big crazy fest. But it doesn't really give you any advantage. It just kind of changes what's going on for a short time.
Well, even beyond that, actually did watch some of Myth's stream when I was trying to get my key. And I noticed that what happened was streamers like Myth early on decided that they hated the low gravity event. So every time it came up, viewers were voting for the low gravity event. So there's this one event that is just constantly going through because the streamers hate it. And I feel like that's what's going to happen every time you end up in streams with or in games with streamers.
Right. Yeah, it's weird. And then, I mean, there's a couple other things it does differently. Like just in general, this game has a very high time to kill, and everyone is super mobile because a lot of the abilities that you can find have to do with mobility in one way or another. Like there's this like hamster ball one. There's this
There's the
one
wall which
where,
stops it.
yeah, there's the jump up in the air one and then slam down. Like there's a lot of stuff that has to do with mobility, and just in general, you have a lot of mobility as it is, which is cool. Like it feels cool to kind of just go flying around the place, and you have so much mobility. You can kind of go anywhere. You can climb, like you can get up anywhere. So it's cool, but it does also, at least for me, I don't really like the gameplay implications that has, where it feels like it's very hard to actually finish people off or
Yeah.
to finish a squad off, because what kind of happens a lot of the time is like a fight might break out and then one person will die or something eventually after you've chased them for a long time, and they keep running around corners, and then they jump up in the air, and then now they're on top of that building, and you're chasing after them. It's easy for people to get you to lose sight of them, and it's easy for a squad that was losing, like let's say somebody died, to kind of just run off. And because the way that death works, where you become that ghost, and you can kind of just run off with them too. It means that like if you start losing a fight, you can just leave. Like you don't even have to get the person that died. You don't have to go there to them because they can just come with you and then be revived somewhere else.
Well,
So
on that note, actually, we should mention that the way that respawns work is that when you kill someone, it drops a respawn point, and that's it.
yeah,
Like you just and it they step on it and you get them up in like a second or two and they're just back.
yeah. And so yeah, and that's the other thing that plays into it as well. Like it's very hard for your kill to actually mean anything if you kill someone, because it's so easy to get them back up and it's so easy for everyone to just run away. And even if you're chasing after them, I mean, it's very hard to actually kill the people that are running away because there's so much mobility. So it's just, that's the one thing that at least from my impressions, it felt like matches could kind of go on for a while because people that there's just so much durability, even just in terms of like if you die, it's not necessarily the end of the world because you can just run off somewhere and get revived somewhere like totally out, like totally somewhere else, and they don't even have to come back to you or anything. So it's not even like in some games where you could kind of camp the spot where you killed someone and prevent their squad mates from getting them back up. So like to ensure that person stays dead. So it feels like there's a lot of people in the match for a very long time.
I mean, but not even just that. The people that are dead get to choose where they're respawned within
Yeah.
the scope of everyone that's died. And I mean, I really do mean everyone in the match that's died. And that's what's really awkward feeling about it is that you have all of these different respawn points all over the map, and they only disappear when the sector they're in like goes under, like it shuts down. I don't remember what terminology they use, but whenever it shuts down, that's when they go away. But say you have a bunch of sectors where people died, especially since I think that the last sector is always the same because I'm pretty sure the crown spawns at that one building, but I mean, we didn't live long enough times for me to be sure about that. But it does mean that if you have a lot of sectors that aren't shutting down, that have a lot of respawn points, there are just always a lot of respawn points, and you just
Yeah.
have free reign over where you want to be respawned.
Well, and also it's not like you know, I keep going back to Apex, but it's not like Apex where you can't just like once you use a respawn point, that is gone and that can't be used again. So, or even in Fortnite, I think as well, at least for a time, it can't be used again. I don't remember,
Yeah, it's
but
temporary.
okay. Well, either way, there is some kind of limit on you being able to get people back up. Like, especially in Apex, where it's like you can't just revive people over and over and over again once they totally die because that's just not possible because the respawn points run out. Whereas in this, there is a theoretically like infinite number of them because people could just keep dying and then being gotten back up, and then every time somebody goes down, that's just another one, and the same person could go down multiple times in a match and create like three from just them in a match. So
And we should clarify that this is as far as we know that it works.
yes. Yeah, so as far as I know, there's no way like there's no limitation on the amount of times you can be gotten back up or the amount of times you can create a point. So it's just I don't know, like it's cool to it was cool to see it, but it's not something that I think I would go back to long term off of what we saw so far.
Definitely. But also, I think for me, the major failure that they had is that they had this perfect, like, so if you know anything about Assassin's Creed, you know that a lot of the modern games revolve around the Animus, specifically like the Animus and being inside of the Animus. And they had this chance to take the battle royale and fit it in with Abstergo Incorporated and to like make it some sort of like weird Animus thing, and they just didn't. And, like, I just feel like that's short-sighted on their part, especially since I'm pretty sure it's the same studio that made Hyperscape.
Yeah, I'm not really sure on that, but yeah, it does like the other corporation thing was that I forget what it was, like Prismus or something. I don't remember.
Prisma.
Prisma. Yeah, that's right. It was fine, but it's not like super interesting, at least to me. So definitely, I think there's if they wanted to do more of that, then that is something that they could do to make it more interesting.
Yeah. I just I really do hope that this isn't exactly what it looks like. That's all I'm gonna say.
Yeah, and the other thing, like one other thing as well is the balance of the weapons seemed very off. Like a lot of them, at least for me, seemed very weak, and then there's some that seemed overwhelmingly strong. And you can if you're really good at the game and it doesn't really apply, I could would get that. But there's a lot of people who are going to be playing who aren't super good at it. Like I acknowledge I'm a noob at the game because we didn't play it for that long. It wasn't even out that long. But things like I think it was the grenade launcher, just
Yeah.
felt so incredibly strong, like ridiculously strong, and very hard to deal with. And then there's just a lot of guns that just seem totally worthless. And I think that definitely needs to be addressed, especially because there aren't really that many guns. So it didn't feel great in that regard either.
And I mean, I wasn't totally convinced that the grenade launcher was OP. I was like, maybe I'm just doing something wrong. And then we got to this point where there were a bunch of people fighting at the bottom of a building. And I had a grenade launcher, and I literally just fired like one clip into it and killed 3 people. And I'm like, okay, I didn't even try. I literally had it at the same angle the entire time and just fired 5 grenades in there. And they just all died.
Yeah. Well, because the fire rate is very fast and it does a ton of damage, and it feels very easy to hit people with it too. So it's just like the explosion radius seems pretty big, so it just seemed like so overwhelmingly strong, and then other guns just felt like very weak, at least to me. So
Yeah,
I'm hoping, and actually for the abilities, it felt kind of similar. Like some of them to me seemed kind of
the
useless.
hamster ball.
Yeah, I don't really understand the point of the hamster ball or like what it is, what makes it useful over something else because you can only have two abilities. So you really have to decide what you want to take. And for me, I never like the hamster ball didn't seem great. The mine
The
didn't
wall
seem super
doesn't actually
useful.
wall things off. Because if you can have the potential to wall it off, it cuts it short before it does,
Yeah.
which cuts off like half of its usefulness to me.
Yeah.
But also, I was gonna say, the grenade launcher actually sits at a direct counterpoint to the Skybreaker, I think, which is the one that does one shot that does 80 damage and has a decent explosion radius, but it's a slow firing gun, and the thing it fires is slow. So it's balanced around the
Yes.
fact that it does like 80 to 100 damage, whereas the grenade launcher, one salvo can take someone down, and it just doesn't work at all. And I
Yeah.
mean, so yeah. But
Yeah.
that was all I was going to say about that, I think.
Yeah, just all in all, it was cool to see it, but I don't think it didn't seem like, at least for me and some other people that I know, it didn't seem to have a whole lot of staying power. Like I don't see much that this game does that's really unique in a way that actually makes it fun over the numerous other battle royale games that are available, many of which are free as well. So even being free is, that doesn't really matter. There's so many free battle royales, and there's so many battle royales to pay for as well. So it just, a lot of what I saw, I don't see it being like I don't see any reason to play it over another one. And yeah, I mean, I guess we'll see probably tomorrow when Ubisoft does their event or whatever. But I feel like they have to launch it soon after doing this because otherwise I think interest will drop off very quickly. But if they launch it soon, then I wonder like how much will they even be able to address before launch of any issues that we talked about or that other people had, or like how different can it really be from what we played if they're going to launch it super soon, which I feel like they have to because it's so easy for everyone to just lose interest in battle royales.
Yeah, I guess it really depends if it's a bait and switch. But I mean, I think the best way I can put it is that it's an interesting thought experiment in what if you did all these things differently, but I don't think it comes out to like a more fun game.
No, I would say for me it pretty pretty comprehensively comes out to being a less fun battle royale game than many others. So just off of what it is so far, and to be fair, like battle royales, even after they come out, can change drastically over time. So even if it comes out and it's pretty much exactly what it was, in a couple of years or in a year, it could be totally different. But just off of what there is right now, I think it's kind of lackluster.
I mean, that wouldn't be totally off-brand for Ubisoft anyways after Rainbow Six.
Yeah.
Anyways, I think that's about it for today, so we will see you guys at the next podcast. Take care.